As NTSB investigators comb through wreckage of this deadly MD-11 cargo plane crash in Louisville, Kentucky, dozens of MD-11s now grounded by two of the nation's top parcel carriers, FedEx and UPS.
UPS and FedEx said they are grounding their fleets of McDonnell Douglas MD-11 planes, quote, out of an abundance of caution following a deadly crash at the UPS Global Aviation Hub in Kentucky.
All right, it looks like the domino effect has begun with the MD-11 incident out of Muhammad Ali International Airport in Louisville, Kentucky. That horrific crash, the loss of life right now stands at 14, 3 on the airplane, 11 on the ground, still 9 people missing altogether. And over the weekend, UPS and FedEx both voluntarily grounded their fleet of MD-11 aircraft. We're going to talk about what sort of an effect that has. And then late this weekend, the FAA came out with an Emergency Airworthiness Directive. I've got that here for you. I'm going to describe how that changes the picture on the MD-11 and what impact and what scope of impact does that have on you and I, the traveling public, if any at all. So what's an Emergency Airworthiness Directive? Well, it's right here, and the FAA issues these very sparingly. But when they do, they're done quickly. The word emergency is hugely important here. Other airworthiness directives are things that are deliberate, intentional, they take time, they have a public hearing period where the public can comment, Boeing, Airbus, whoever can come in and give testimony, and lawyers, and those things sometimes take weeks or months to implement, and they would be like a longer term recall of something or some repair that needs to get made that's not in the public interest in terms of safety, but it is in terms of the long-term viability of a fleet to make sure that it does stay safe down the road. An emergency one, though, means that there's an immediate need, and as you could see from the footage of that airplane going off the end of the runway and that horrific fireball and crash, the left engine completely separated from the MD-11, and there's a history here, and that's the key. The history goes all the way back to the DC-10 and that terrible American Airlines 191 crash back in 1979 out of O'Hare, where they got up to about 500 feet and the left engine came completely off the DC-10, causing the left slats to retract. That was a double failure, basically. It made things twice as bad on that airplane. Not only did they not have the thrust on the left side and that tendency of the airplane to yaw from the right side to the left into a left bank, but that left slat came up and the airplane just dipped, and 110 degrees later it impacted the ground. So there are concerns going all the way back to the late 70s with this type of aircraft design. The tri-jet, the MD-11 is basically the child of the DC-10, if you can think about it that way. What's an Emergency Airworthiness Directive? Well, it's something that's put out immediately to ground the entire fleet. And let me read to you from the beginning of this Airworthiness Directive. Emergency Airworthiness Directive, and it's directed to the operators of the Boeing company, models MD-11 and MD-11 Foxtrot airplanes. So those two model airplanes have been grounded until further notice by the FAA. Why is it the Boeing company? I mean, I thought MD-11 was McDonnell Douglas. Well, the Boeing company bought or merged with McDonnell Douglas back in the late 90s, and so it's been Boeing ever since. So did Boeing design and build the airplane? No, they inherited it, though, when they purchased the McDonnell Douglas Corporation. It gives you a little bit of a background. The emergency AD was prompted by an accident where the left-hand engine and, this is real important, I circled this, and the pylon detached from the airplane during takeoff. And then it goes on at the bottom of that paragraph to say this condition could result in loss of continued safe flight and landing. So they're really concerned about that pylon. The pylon was the issue back in the DC-10 era. They're concerned about it now. And I don't think they know exactly what happened yet. It's going to take a long time to determine this, whether it was the pylon that failed causing the engine to fail, or the engine failure caused the pylon to fail. Either way, I know that the NTSB had come out and said initially in one of their on-camera interviews that the pylon was intact. It was still attached to the wing. So it could be either one. We're not going to know until either the preliminary or the 12-month report comes out of which it was the chicken or the egg in this case. It goes on in this report to say the FAA is issuing this AD because the agency has determined the unsafe condition, keywords now, is likely to exist or develop in other products of the same type design. So the entire fleet of MD-11s, at least nationwide, have been grounded. Now, if there's MD-11s that are being flown overseas, again, I think it would be in the best interest of those airlines to make sure that they ground those airplanes, but I don't think the FAA has authorization over them to ground those aircraft. Now, what's the scope of all of this? How many aircraft are we actually talking about? Well, we're talking about, at least from the UPS and FedEx world, we're talking about 9% of the UPS fleet. So the UPS has 27 of these aircraft, and out of those 27 aircraft, they've got a total of 292 airplanes. Comes out to roughly about 9%. That's a big hit. That's a big hit for UPS, especially coming into this busy holiday season. So I'm going to talk in a second about what do they do to make sure that their cargo gets transported during the busy holiday season. FedEx now owns 25 MD-11s out of their fleet of 382 total airplanes. So FedEx is a little bit bigger than UPS. It's only 6.6% of their total fleet, but still, that's a big hit. And for them, in the wrong direction coming into the busy time of year. So normally this time of year, FedEx and UPS will surge, though they're out there looking for more capacity. Where do they get that extra capacity? They're going to get that extra capacity from American, Delta, United, Southwest, you name it, all the other airlines. They're going to look at some of the international haulers like World Airlines, Atlas, all of those. There's bunch of outfits that fly 747s. They're also busier during the holiday season as well. So if they have excess capacity, FedEx, UPS, and those, Amazon is another one that is going to buy up that extra capacity. So again, losing 9% of your fleet before you go into the busy season where you want to increase by 10, 15, maybe even 20% this time of year is a double whammy on UPS. Does it impact the passenger business? Is there anybody that flies the MD-11 with passengers in it anymore? The answer to that is no. The last airline to fly passengers in an MD-11 was KLM, and the last flight they had was October of 2014, where they carried passengers. Since then, all those MD-11s have been converted over to cargo hauling airplanes. Now, why did we stop flying passengers on the MD-11? Was it because it was unsafe? Nope. It just wasn't very efficient. I know at my airline, American Airlines, we bought not a lot, but we bought a few MD-11s in the 90s, and we only flew them for about 4 or 5 years, and then we sold them. I think they weren't happy with the product overall. I think they had some maintenance issues, and not like wings or engines falling off, but they had to keep up with them, right? And it was too much work. And it wasn't as fuel efficient as we had hoped for. And right about that time, in the mid-90s into the early 2000s, all the airlines were getting out of the 4 and 3 engine airplanes and into 2 engine airplanes, much more efficient. Let me give you an example of a trip from Louisville, Kentucky to Honolulu, which was UPS 2976. They're going to carry on an MD-11 220,000 pounds of gas to get out there and have all their reserve fuel when they get there. A typical 767 is going to carry 165,000 pounds of gas, about a third less. So it costs a third more to operate an MD-11. So do I believe that UPS and FedEx are trying to get out of the MD-11 business? Probably. They voluntarily grounded their fleet over the weekend. Now, would they have done it coming into the busy holiday season? No, they probably would have done it sometime next year, not for safety reasons, but just for cost reasons. I think they're looking to get out of it. However, their hand has been forced by this Emergency Airworthiness Directive. Let me continue to read here. At the bottom, it says, this Airworthiness Directive authorizes agencies to forego notice and comment procedures for rules when the agency, for good cause, finds that those procedures are impractical unnecessary, or contrary to the public interest. Okay, that's lawyer speak for we can implement this thing overnight and ground the entire fleet because we're concerned about public safety. That's exactly what that means. It goes on down here to say an unsafe condition exists that requires the immediate adoption of this emergency AD to all known U.S. owners and operators of these airplanes. So they just reiterated what they said in the earlier paragraph, that this is a safety issue. They've identified a safety issue, and they're going to ground the fleet to do the inspections necessary. On the last page, it talks about inspection and other actions. And under that paragraph, it says, as of receipt of this emergency AD, further flight is prohibited until the airplane is inspected and all applicable corrective actions are performed using a method approved by the manager. The manager would be the FAA. All right, having said that, they're going to start now their long work of looking at this airplane and inspecting it and coming up with what the fix could be potentially. They've got to identify the problem first, and they've got to identify a fix. I think the MD-11 is going to be down for a very, very long time. And I think, this is just my guess on this, I don't think you're going to see the MD flying ever again. I think UPS and FedEx are probably going to retire that fleet of airplane. They'll go out this next year and they'll replace it with other types, probably two-engine airplanes that do the same job for a whole lot less cost on their part, and they'll be done with the headache that basically is the MD-11 at this point. Why do airlines and why do cargo haulers have so many different types of airplanes? Have you ever wondered that? I've wondered that many times, because at my airline, there's, 6, 7 different types of aircraft. And you think it would be much more efficient to have one airplane, or at least one manufacturer. Southwest is a good example. They fly only 737s. They don't fly any other airplane. And so their training costs are less, their maintenance costs are less, they're much more efficient in regards of their fleet composition. However, there's a danger that they run, and the danger is this. If the FAA ever comes out with an Emergency Airworthiness Directive and they ground the entire 737 fleet, Southwest is out of business. And when the MAX was grounded, it was grounded for what, I think 7 or 8 months. It was a long time that the MAX was grounded. It might have even been longer than that, but at any rate, it was grounded for a long time, and Southwest would not have survived that. Having diversification in your fleet, it's survivable to have one aircraft type grounded for a certain period of time over another one, because you can continue to operate. It also ups your costs because you're flying Airbus and Boeing and different types of airplanes. It also limits for Southwest what they can do. They're pretty much just a domestic airline, because the 737 has limited legs. It can't fly, to deep south in South America. It can't fly all the way to deep points in Europe. So again, they're kind of limited in what they can do. So an airline or a cargo hauler will have a diversified fleet so that they can get halfway around the world if they need to deliver cargo or to deliver passengers. So the only other airline that flies MD-11s in the U.S. is Western Global. I couldn't find any information on how many MD-11s they have, but if they've got them, they're going to have to ground them. All right. So 9% of UPS, 6.6% of FedEx. Why was there no Emergency Airworthiness Directive issued for Air India 171. All right. Some of you are thinking about that right now. You're thinking, hey, wait a minute. That airplane had passengers on board and the fuel control switches were in question on that thing. Why didn't they issue an Emergency Airworthiness Directive, ground the entire 787 fleet around the world, and go and inspect all those fuel control switches? Well, 2 airlines voluntarily did. Air India and Korean Air both voluntarily went and inspected all of their fuel control switches. They didn't find anything wrong with them. Many times, what doesn't get done or what doesn't get said is just as loud as what does get done and does get said. So if you're thinking, the FAA is in the tank with Boeing and they're just out to protect Boeing, and I get a lot of that stuff in my comments, they aren't. Right? Because this is going to be a hurt to Boeing for them to ground the MD-11 fleet. If they had needed to ground the 787 fleet, they would have done it, folks. They would have done it, right? Their main purpose is public safety and to make sure that those airplanes are safe. There was absolutely nothing wrong with that 787 that crashed in the Air India crash 171. That's why they didn't issue, even go out and voluntarily inspect the airplanes. They knew that there was nothing wrong with those airplanes. There was a different cause at play there for why those fuel control switches transitioned from run to cut off just after rotate. So you ever wonder the question, how does a crew on an airplane find out that their airplane has been grounded? Because when they come out with this airworthiness directive, they don't give any advance notice. It's just they issue it. And from that moment, that second forward, every airplane is grounded. Well, what if you're already in the air? What if you're taxiing out? What if you're landing and coming into a gate? Well, you're going to get a message that looks like this in the cockpit. It comes over your ACARS screen, and it's an ACARS message, which is basically texting for airplanes, where anybody on the ground can, not anybody, but your dispatcher can text you a message. And this one reads that it's part 1 of 2, but it says, please return to block per UPS MD-11 are not to depart effective immediately. So if you're taxiing out and you get that message, guess what? You're going to turn around and go back to the gate. If you're airborne, you're going to go to your destination and land, and that's going to be it. So again, these are interesting things, something you don't normally see, but we got a picture that somebody took of an actual ACARS screen when they issued this airworthiness directive. And at that point, then they've got to land the airplane or they've got to taxi back to the gate. No more flying for the MD-11. The entire MD-11 fleet is now grounded until further notice. How is it going to impact the holiday season here coming up? Well, it's not going to be a good news for UPS and FedEx. They're going to have to scramble at this point to find capacity to carry all the boxes and cargo that needs to go during the busy holiday season. I'm certainly sure that they will find it, but it's also going to impact all the other airlines. Is it going to impact the passenger business? No, I don't think so. Not at all. But the cargo business, yeah, absolutely. There might be longer delays this year, and you're probably going to see a little paragraph or sentence when you check the tracking on your box that says, due to airworthiness directives from the FAA, expect longer than normal transportation times for your box. It may take longer to get there. That's a small inconvenience compared to the importance of keeping these airplanes safe and flying, and certainly the 14 families that have been impacted by the fatalities here are not interested in the least about anybody else's packages getting any place on time. So we want to make sure that there's not another 14 families that are impacted or even more somewhere down the road. The FAA is doing the right thing. This is an airworthiness directive. You don't see them very often. Now you know the impact of it and why the FAA issued it over the weekend. As we get more details about the fleet and what's happening, especially with this crash in Louisville, we'll come right back to you with those details. Well, now you know. I'm Captain Steeeve. Fly safe. So if you'd like to see some other videos about UPS 2976 or any other incidents recently that kind of fall into this category, check out one of these videos.